My name is Jim Wagner. I'm the vice chair, but I'll be serving as the chair in Chair Jenny Biggs' stead. She was called away unexpectedly. And so I call to order the regular meeting of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority Community Oversight Committee as of April 22nd, 2026. The time now is 3:03 p.m. Martina, would you please call the roll?
Certainly, sir. We'll call the full roll just so the minutes can reflect who is not present with us today. And then once we proceed with the motion items, I don't have to call those who are absent. So starting with member Scott Pinsky.
Present.
Rebecca Suggs.
Present.
Pat Randolph.
Here.
Larry Minigas.
Present.
John McCauley.
I'm also here.
Bruce Bartell.
Here.
Vice Chair Jim Wagner, acting chair for the day. And
Present.
Chair Jenny Biggs is absent for today's meeting. We do have a quorum, sir. We may proceed.
Thank you, Martina. We will start with the agenda adjustments. Are there any agenda adjustments?
Well, I have several. I hate to do this to everybody, but I have to leave at 4:30. And can I read off to you the order that I would like them to be in?
Yes.
So 1 we've already done, 2 we've already done. We're at 3, 4, 5, 6 are in order, and 7 could be in order. And then 9, 8C, 8B, 8A, 7, 10, and 11. Or actually, maybe it would be better if we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 9, 8C, 8B, 8A, 10, and 11.
Sounds good.
Martina, do we need to vote on that or can we just agree?
Yes, we do. We will need to entertain a motion. I just want to make sure I have this correct for the minutes. Pat, are you suggesting or requesting rather that we proceed with items 1 through 7, and then after 7 we go with item 9, and then 8C, and 8B, then 8A, then 10, and then 11?
Yes, that is exactly right.
Okay, if we can have a motion to proceed with the agenda according to Pat's suggested adjustments, I'll take a vote.
Can I ask a question? If I wanted to pull the consent calendar because for a minor adjustment in the minutes, do I need to do that with hers or can I do that as a separate motion?
Yeah, so you don't need to pull the consent calendar item necessarily. You can state for the purpose of the meeting that you'd like to, approve them. You can make the motion to approve the minutes with, such and such edits.
Okay.
If you have them, and you just need to be specific.
Okay. So the motion has been made and seconded.
I'll second it.
Okay, who made the motion?
Bruce.
Bruce, with a second by?
John.
Okay, John. Okay, so that's a motion by member Bruce Bartell with a second from member John McCauley to proceed with the meeting up through item 7. And then after item 7, we will move with item 9, 8C, 8B, 8A, 10, and 11. That is our agenda adjustment. The motion has been made and we'll now call for a vote, starting with Pat Randolph.
Yes.
Scott Pinsky.
Yes.
Rebecca Suggs.
Yes.
Larry Minigas.
Yes.
John McCauley.
Yes.
Bruce Bartell.
Yes.
And Jim Wagner.
Aye.
Okay, and that motion passes by unanimous vote of all in attendance today. We may proceed.
All right. if I understood you correctly, Martina, now would be the time to do the edit to the minutes? Or not?
Certainly. Yeah,
Okay.
so now proceeding from, well, not quite yet.
You
So,
gotta do the 4, 5. You do 4 and 5.
well, correct. We just finished with the agenda adjustments. And so our next item is item 4, the open time for public expression.
Thank you. So,
So we normally ask whether there is anybody in the public on the call.
Yeah, so starting with item 4, just for the sake of the minutes, just for the information for the committee, we do not currently have any attendees, but I will just go ahead and read for the minutes that the public is welcome to address the Community Oversight Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to the Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 2 minutes and should be respectful to the community. We would ask that any attendees please silence their phones during the meeting and mute their microphones when not reporting out. I did want to let the committee know that we do not currently have any attendees, and I'm happy to inform you if someone should arrive.
thanks, Martina. So we'll move on. And Martina, you're giving the executive officer's report?
Yes, I will just give a brief, quick few updates. Good afternoon, everyone. Just a few updates to share following the recent board and committee meetings for the month. On the fuels outlook, we've been slightly dry this year with above average temperatures. There was a climatologist from the California Geological Survey projected a potentially active fire season, although large fire risk appears stable through May and June. Projections beyond May and June are still unknown. For those of you who didn't know, Mark Brown, our executive officer, and Director Hilliard, our board president, co-authored a Marin Voice piece that ran from April 1st, and it highlighted the CWPP. The draft CWPP will be publicly unveiled on May 2nd at the Embassy Suites in San Rafael. Doors for that event will open at 9:30 a.m. and presentations will begin at 10. The event will include a panel discussion moderated by former Novato Fire Chief Bill Tyler, who is now the Director of Fire Safe Marin. And there will also be tabling by agency staff. So would definitely encourage everyone to attend if you're able. If you didn't already know, last month on March 24th, Marin Wildfire hosted the Resources Legacy Fund Board. There were about 30 members at the Sleepy Hollow Community Center. That visit included site tours of Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break and a home hardening demonstration. Mentioned at the board, for those who were not there, Director Kohler noted that Marin LAFCO recently completed a study of all fire agencies in Marin, and a new draft of that is available and will be shared with staff for circulation for anyone who's interested. At this past board meeting on April 16th, zone-specific 26-27 work plan proposals were presented. Each zone made a presentation, and board action on the full work plan is expected at the May board meeting. There was an update on the finance side. The 24-25 audit has been initiated and is expected to be completed by the August board meeting. This will allow the 25-26 audit to launch in the fall, and that will put Marin Wildfire back on track with its normal schedule of reporting audits within that 180 days of June 30th. And then my last update is just something that came up from last meeting. The board has yet to set a date for their strategic planning session, and we will definitely keep you all posted on that as it develops. There was a question asked as to whether the public would be invited to that session. I did follow up with council as suggested, and whether or not that meeting is going to be a part of the larger board conversation or a separate strategic planning standalone workshop, it will be publicly noticed. Members of this committee as well as the public are allowed to join. So as soon as we have that date, we'll make sure that not only you all are apprised, but that we post it for public notice. And that is the end of my report.
Thanks, Martina. Are there any questions from the committee?
I do have one. As far as the agenda for the meeting was concerned, when I looked at it last week, there was no discussion of the status of the audit report. So was that agendized, or how did that get onto the calendar?
Oh, it wasn't onto the calendar. So that was a part of the finance report. When our finance, the people over at Southern Marin who are managing our interim finance activities, that was part of her report,
Okay, thank you.
of course. And then for anyone who's interested, her full report is available online in the archives. You can watch that video.
Okay. Yeah, because there was no attachment to the agenda of any staff report there.
Yeah, she gave an update that was a little bit more lengthy than what I just provided to you all. And she kind of gave some information regarding sort of where the status we are with our financial reporting, financial activities, and what has sort of been responsible for the delays and a little bit of lack of consistency on the finance side since we lost our treasurer.
Yeah, okay.
So I did watch the board meeting, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in that report.
Okay, all right.
Any other comments from the committee? Any members of the public who wish to comment on this item?
You don't have to do that. She'll tell you if anyone joins.
There are no hands for comment at this time, sir.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the consent calendar.
And I sent Martina some minor corrections earlier today.
Okay, you probably got what I was going to do. It
Well,
was it.
You can go ahead and mention.
Okay, yeah, I was given credit for bringing up something I think John did.
No.
Yeah, under core, the committee member Wagner offered to update and recirculate a previously developed framework documenting the prescribing
Oh, that's right.
the COC's oversight. So if that could be changed from Wagner to Macaulay, because it's his document.
Absolutely. And then, Pat, did you want to just go ahead and speak? You didn't have many edits. Did you want to say those out loud for the purpose of the minutes as well?
Well, what I noted was a little bit of inconsistency in, now I'm already forgetting what I was noting, the inconsistency in.
Yeah, so I can inform the committee.
Yes.
Pat had basically said that just for the purpose of formatting and proper abbreviations, in the minutes I had listed D space, and she just suggested that before abbreviating D space to at least at the very first time of mention to spell out defensible space and then abbreviate after that. So just a bit of formatting. And so it sounds like with today's edits, unless there are any additionals, that was member Randolph's edit about just making sure that D space is fully listed out before abbreviating. And then for you, Jim, there was an inaccurate credit that actually belongs to member Macaulay.
Yeah.
Regarding the circulation.
Any other edits?
I move that we accept the minutes with those edits as described.
Second.
Okay, and that's a motion by member Macaulay with a second from member Minikis. The vote starting with Scott Pinsky.
Aye.
Rebecca Suggs. Oh, did we lose Rebecca? Oh, you're
She's
muted.
muted.
Aye.
Okay, Pat Randolph,
Aye.
Larry Minikis,
Yes.
John Macaulay,
Yes.
Bruce Bartell,
Yes.
and Jim Wagner.
Aye.
And that is a unanimous vote for approval. The motion passes.
Thank you, Martina. We'll go on to the board monitoring committees. Anyone have an executive committee report?
This is Scott. I attended the executive committee, and essentially, it's not much different from what I think you heard earlier from Martina, summarizing the presentation of the next year's project summary overview. And anybody who watched the full board meeting probably saw the same thing as we saw at the executive committee meeting, which was essentially a very lengthy presentation of proposals for next year's programs. Very detailed, extensive spreadsheets and notes and slides. No way to really summarize that other than to say it was a complete presentation of what MWPA has in mind for the coming year. I thought it was extremely well presented, both at the XCOM as well as the full board. I mean, we just have an amazing staff at MWPA, I think, to be able to present all of these programs and have that in their minds and just rattle it off. So that's what I saw at the executive committee. And like I said, if you either watched that or you watched the full board meeting, you probably saw pretty much the same thing, I think. And that's essentially all I would say as far as a summary.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions from the committee? Any public comment? Do I do this after each committee or towards the end?
Typically in a meeting when you chair, we do go out for public comment after each item. We don't have any participants in the public. It is good practice to go out. But if you'd like to skip the public comment call out, I'm happy to just let you know when we get a public member in attendance.
Okay, thanks. So we'll go on to the operations committee.
So I watched half of the operations committee, and then I went back early this afternoon to watch the other half, and I couldn't get it to work. So now that you know that I did not watch the whole thing live, but when I knew I wasn't going to get it to work, I did print out one little section that talks about the approach that they are taking, and most of it is the same thing that they've done before, with a couple of exceptions, talking about house out, home hardening in D-space, shaded fuel breaks, prescribed fire, evaluations. I think maybe a new one is insurance, public education, and ignition reductions. That's hard to say. But I am sure that the meeting was wonderful, and when I finally get to watch the other half, I will let you know.
Thank you, Pat. Any questions, comments from the committee? All right, let's move on to the board of directors. Anybody else watch the board besides me?
I did.
Scott did. And Larry.
Yeah.
Right.
It was excellent. Really a lot of information, a lot of good questions from the board. I would suggest if you haven't seen it to watch it. Nothing specific to say, but just it was an excellent board meeting. Yeah.
Okay. And Martina also did a nice summary of the board meeting as well.
Yeah.
The only thing that I would add is there was an initial discussion about the executive officer at-will agreement who received a CPI and merit increase with good evaluations. So job well done there. A little bit more about the financial report, because I think it's going to come up later specifically for D-Space. Essentially, the person doing the presentation was Josette Ring-Lukin, who is part of Southern Marin. And essentially she was, the summary of what she said was, well, I don't have anything to report right now because everything's kind of delayed, but I wanted to tell you why things are delayed. And the reason she said it was delayed is because, well, the County of Marin hasn't provided their information. They're running a little bit late. And so that was kind of an explanation for this particular budget report, but it wasn't really an explanation for what the delay, the huge delay of the audits. So at least in my in my listening to what was said, there wasn't really an explanation for that. And I think we can talk more about that later.
Yeah, caught that as well.
Yeah. The work plan updates, they're going to mostly discuss that in the May board of directors meeting. Draft JPA-wide proposals, mostly continuation of past successful programs. So it was, I agree, it was a good meeting, very informative, very fast paced, and filled the full 2 hours. Questions, comments? Okay, now we are going to move on to discussion items. Number 9 on the original agenda, but we've moved it up to number 8. And so there was an attachment. This is the approach to the COC review process. And John, you want to kind of take over?
Yeah, so several of you had been around when we presented this originally, and it was a point in time discussion that surrounded a number of items which were in debate or review among the various COC members. And we resolved any things that were questionable, and we agreed upon an approach to take as far as how to get through our process. When Jim and I were working together on DSpace, he kind of asked me some questions about how this stuff works, and I said, well, here, read this. And he went, oh, wow, I've never seen this before. This is pretty good. Yeah. So at the last meeting, as I said at the meeting, I agreed that I would update it. I made it shorter. I tightened it up a little bit because some of the stuff that was well agreed, I didn't need to go into a whole bunch of blah, blah, blah about, so I cut it down a little bit. So I've got the document here in front of me. I've kind of gone through it, and in my own mind, I thought, okay, what are the more significant components of it? So I'll run through them, but as we go, especially from the perspective of those of you who had not seen it before,
Can I make a comment before you get too far
Sure.
into this?
Yeah.
I had forgotten that you had, until I read the minutes,
Right.
that you had suggested that we read this, and I started reading it, and after about the first page, it suddenly dawned on me, this is the Lucy Dilworth,
Right.
Larry Chu, and John McCauley report.
Right.
And at around the same time that this was written, there were other things written or published that dealt with the same subject matter. And I think that what's really, really important today is that we finish our work on the report, and perhaps at the next meeting, take this up along with 2 or 3 of those other documents that
What were the other documents? Sorry to interrupt.
well, there's one that's a timeline that shows when things should be completed by.
Sorry to laugh. We've never
I
hit
know.
those.
Well, I know, but I think it's important
Mhm.
that we keep reminding ourselves, for us to have any meaningful purpose. I would love for our report to be finished in time for the operations committee, who's working on the work plan for next year, to have seen our report. And that requires that we get it out in January or February for them to be able to see it before they have finished their work on that. And that's one thing this timeline mentions, is when the report should be published. And
Well, in fact, we had, sorry to interrupt you, but we had planned to do that this year,
yeah,
except for the absence of any,
yeah.
which
But
is one of my key Or one of our key findings in D-space. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's an issue of Mark perhaps having consequences for the various agencies not getting the information to him, that.
So we can cover that in our findings, because I have findings in D-space about that, so we could.
Yeah.
I agree, by the way.
Yeah, and I think that having more time to look at this would be beneficial to us, and I think it's really, really important that we get this report out. That, here it is, the end of April, and
Exactly. Right.
and we need to be talking about the report and getting the report out rather than talking about how to write a report.
Well, I'm happy to table this to another date. The only and I didn't believe we were going to have an extended conversation about this. This is all agreed upon process. And the reason I spent the time, I didn't really have, but I spent the time on this was so that I could just get it in. You guys can say, yeah, that looks great. And we can just say, now it becomes a part of our living documents that we continue to provide to new members as they come on board. It would, instead of a point in time thing, would be a thing like, okay, this is how we operate, right?
Yeah.
So if you have objections to how this is covered, in actual fact, let's just move on.
Okay.
And say that it sits there. I'm not sure. I'm getting pretty frustrated with this organization, and I'm actually getting very frustrated with this organization. I want you guys to have this, so if I suddenly don't show up, you've got it, okay? So on that basis, I'm happy to say we can table this, or if there's any particular questions people have now, I won't go through what I think are the important components of it. But this would have taken me 15 minutes to go through, but I'm fine to do it at a later date.
And I think that at least Rebecca and I know where to find this, that we have talked about the fact that we need to have a place for important documents to be kept, so we don't keep inventing the wheel.
Exactly. That was my intention of presenting it today.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's a great intention. But, but I would love to perhaps take this up after we have.
That's fine.
Gone through.
That's fine. Let's move on. Okay.
So, Pat,
We do
you're
have
suggest-
sorry, not to interrupt, but we do have a hand raised from Member Pinsky.
Hi, I just wanted to make an observation or two so that when we do discuss this further, we can have these ideas in mind. I know we don't want to go into the details of it, but I would just say two things. First of all, I found it a very valuable source of general approach for the COC, which I think would be very valuable for all, especially new members, to be exposed to so that they can know what is the scope of what we're supposed to do and not supposed to do. I thought there were some very helpful observations in there about we aren't supposed to be doing this, we are supposed to be doing that. So that's one observation, is that I think this could be a very good training tool for new members like me who don't know what we're doing yet. And secondly, I would say I read it, and there's a part of me that thought, gee, that all sounds right, but it's almost like legislation. In other words, reading this was almost like rules that are not in the law, but sound like the law in a sense. And I'm not saying there was anything in that memo that I thought was inconsistent with Measure C, but in the back of my mind, I thought, should this memo be approved by MWPA as a way of verifying that, yes, this interpretation of the COC's role is accurate and legally consistent with Measure C? That may be overkill. I don't want to, suggest
Well, for whatever it's worth, the COC was designed with a lot of self-guiding opportunities to do what it wanted. That was one of the important things. Lucy was very clear about that when we had this long, extended conversation about this topic. So we make up how we operate, basically. And we didn't know how we operated. We couldn't figure it out. So the purpose of this thing was this is how we think we should operate. Like the idea of doing 5 out of 17 is not, it's not in any rules. It's just an approach, a methodology. And that's why it's written with some flexibility. It says, well, if you find more, do more. Same thing with the whole basic concept that core is by its nature the least risky, although it's the largest dollar amount, and local is the most risky, and it's one of the smallest dollar amounts, right? So the thought process was there to help us guide how we wanted to operate, but not a law. Anybody can.
And I would like to see us have it more concise, more bullet points, so that we know.
Yeah. I'm not gonna. Okay, I'm gonna get really upset because I spent a lot of time on this.
Yeah.
And a lot of this, the 4 part was all Lucy, by the way. She wrote that. It's excellent. I was happy to keep it in there.
Yes,
I'm getting really
recognize
frustrated.
your style.
I don't want to talk about this anymore today.
Okay.
All right, because otherwise
Okay.
I'm gonna go tear it up, and you guys can figure it out yourselves. Okay? I'm seriously. I'm kind of up to here on this topic. Okay.
We need to preserve institutional knowledge like what John is contributing. And so if everybody is in agreement, we will bring this up later. And I fully support the idea of consolidating it with other things. And this is not something that we're going to give you to do, but I think this is something that maybe a subcommittee can do. The timeline and the onboarding documents, it might be nice to make it all
We've done that before, but whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so that is the discussion items. And I think we can move on to attachment C. This is the core section of the COC report.
Yes.
Before we leave that, are we tabling the discussion item for next month?
Yes,
So it'll appear on the agenda next month.
I think it should be on the agenda next time along with other documents. And you and I can talk because we remember the very beginnings.
And I yes, so
Yeah.
we can do that. I just wanted to make sure it didn't get as a agenda item for next time. That's all.
Yes.
Thanks. Sorry, Jim.
No problem. So on to core?
Yes. And I think with the addition,
Pat, it sounds like we are, really quickly, it sounds like we are all in agreement to table item 9. Can I just get a really quick motion second and take a quick vote?
I so move.
Okay, we have Pat, a motion,
I'll second.
and Scott with a second to table the item presently on today's agenda as number 9, starting with Rebecca Suggs,
Yes.
Scott Pinsky,
Yes.
Pat Randolph,
Yes.
John McCauley.
Well, I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to note something. We haven't even got the financial report yet. We don't have any of our actual financial data. And to think that we're going to be done with this thing at the next meeting, I think is optimistic, but sure, put it on the meeting and then you can push it off to another meeting if you want to, okay? I mean, this is,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
So put me down as a yes with an exclamation mark.
Thank you, sir. Larry Minikis,
Yes.
Bruce Bartell,
Yes.
and Jim Wagner.
Aye.
Okay, so the motion passes to table the item to next month. Thank you all.
We need an artist on the staff who can do an emoji for yes, but disgusted, or
Yeah, exactly.
As you wish.
Core, please.
So I think with the addition of the money spent, ours is ready to go. Unless somebody objects, we did change from findings to observation. And we have observation or observations. And the actual recommendations, and we have funds that were actually spent. If nobody has any objections, I think we can vote on this and move on.
Well, you have one additional item I think that has to happen, and that is that, which is not a problem, but we have to make sure that the rollover document, which we're eventually gonna get, ties to what you've got, so that your numbers have to tie into that, right? So this is a subset of obviously a core, but you'd have to make sure that the total core that's in the database that you've seen is consistent with the rollover document that is prepared in the finance
Yes.
section, right? But that's neither here nor there. I think you could probably vote on this tonight.
Anybody have any comments? Any?
No.
Thanks for making the adjustments that I suggested
Yeah.
last time. I appreciate that. I thought it was well put together.
Okay.
So I'll entertain a motion.
I don't think I can so move.
I'll move.
There's a motion on the table to approve this document for the report, this for the core.
Certainly.
second.
So technically, you don't really need to vote on a non-action item. We don't have either of the three local D-Space or core reports listed as action items.
that makes
Reports,
sense.
discussions, informal presentation. So we can accept the
Okay.
report and proceed.
Okay,
Thank you,
so
Martina. You're right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I mean, really, when we see all of it together at one time in a single document, there's some things can shake out then also.
Yeah.
Right?
And hopefully that will be at the next meeting.
Yeah.
We
Yeah, let me hold my breath. Okay.
See it.
there is a part of core that overlaps with D-Space. And maybe when we have the full document together, we can talk about it when we get to D-Space, but also there needs to be some sort of internal reference or something
Yeah.
like that. Okay, then let's move on to D-Space. John, you want to take the lead on that, or shall I?
I think what makes sense is, I think we need to go through the findings, whatever the hell they're called. The recommendation's pretty slow. I think the rest of the document, maybe we can just highlight a couple of things.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So, I mean, we have the numbers, we finally got the numbers for the actuals for the 6/30/26. The numbers which follow inside the document are basically just the inspection costs and not other costs, right? So that's a problem, right? Because if you're given $100 for inspections, sorry, you're given $100, you spend $70 on inspections, but you spend $30 on the fire truck, and we don't know about it, that's a problem. So and I'm not sure whether historically, given Mark's pushback to me on this topic, whether that had been caught in prior, I forget who did D-Space last go around, but I'm not sure that was as well understood as it possibly could have been. So for whatever that's worth. Okay. Well, whatever. This is these are his tables, not our tables, right? And there's some friction around that. I'll just leave it at that. And also, obviously, we need the financial report, which is done by staff.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one other thing that I noticed when looking at the numbers on here. The first item we have is Central Marin setting aside extra money for defensible space.
Coming out of core.
Coming out of core.
Right.
And yet here they haven't spent all the money.
Correct.
And why is
Right.
core money being spent on dispensable space.
Exactly.
If
Right. Right.
it
Exactly.
was,
We have a flag on that,
Yeah.
our document that's.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we really can't even get to the end until we actually have the real numbers.
Yeah.
So, yes, I agree with you, and we need to pull that together, and I believe we started a comment on those lines, so
Yeah.
yes, that's definitely an issue. Within the four-part, or the, whatever you want to call it, the overview, that's just kind of the story of what's happening, how it all kind of fits together. But within there are a couple of things that I think are of interest. I talked about the numbers. This whole deal about this January through December, I call it a campaign because I'm trying to figure out how to describe this to people. But we have a campaign January through December. And then what they do is they take half of one campaign and then half of the other campaign, we put them together, and that becomes our fiscal result, right? Because our fiscal year is through June, right? So they don't just close the books in June. They wait until December and then figure out what the numbers through December are, and then they take half of that, and that's why there's such a delay. They don't know the fiscal result until they determine half of the total December result, which they don't know until December, so it's more like March until the books are closed, and they say, okay, we know that our campaign costs this much, the fiscal result should contain 2 half campaigns, right? Because it's July through June. So we tried to explain that in here. We quoted what they gave to us. Hopefully, if you read that in here, it's apparent to you now. It was kind of a hard concept to explain. To me, as an accountant, it's like, I won't use a rude word, but it's not something that should happen, right? And that's one of the big causes for all this delay. It makes no sense to me why we would have this methodology. I never understood why things were so late before. I didn't really understand it until we were just like in our very last conversation we had with Mark, and I was like, oh, that's what's happening? I just thought they were slow getting their books closed. Not that they couldn't literally give us the numbers because they hadn't gotten until December yet, right? Because you have to go to December and divide half. So anyway, I was very unclear whether these numbers in these schedules what are they? Are they a year old? Because we had no numbers in the prior year report for some of these things. They were equal. The revenue expense were equal. If you look at the prior year, which now 3 years ago, right? So that was one kind of big surprise that we came across. Then your core supplementing D-space, which is on page 7 of our document, Pat, is something that we are also going, what's going on?
by the way, I would love to ask that people number their pages. It's very easy to do in a computer. That I end up.
It is numbered that you got?
No, this isn't numbered.
Sorry, our version of it's numbered. I think when Martina took it, there was also some bubble comments that were in there that we wanted you to see. And I think that she maybe appropriately decided we didn't want the bubbles there, but we actually did want the bubbles there. So, and I think that you PDF'd it, I think is what happened.
I did.
Yeah. So anyway, we thought you'd have numbers. I apologize for that. My printout has numbers. So, okay, so those are a couple of points from the document. Again, all the tables are irrelevant because they don't contain the inspection costs, right? Which hopefully there aren't much, but we need to know that before we can kind of get to the end there. There is a discussion of what would be my page 9, which was the description that they gave us as to how they do what they. Oh, sorry. No, that one was that we asked Mark, hey, everyone does it differently. Do you have any opinion about who does things better? And he gave us some input there. So that gets us to the observations, and we should probably, essentially, we propose suggested comments, but everyone has to agree with them before they count from the whole CFC. So we can go through these now. They're probably still going to go through further revision, and I can say that I'm not always the best writer, and Jim kindly actually made some edits, but I didn't catch them in time before they came out. So we are definitely going to work on the wording a little bit more. I don't want to hear anything about the wording today, if you don't mind, but at least we want to understand conceptually that we're in the same boat. Okay, so we have our observations. We say, okay, there's different personnel. Everyone does things slightly differently. There's no finding associated with that, but it is an observation. Okay, vehicle expense differences. We haven't come to a conclusion on that yet because we don't know enough about the data. Who charged for vehicles, who's not. So we're still pursuing that. So just be aware that we may be just totally happy about it, or we may have an observation about it. I think one of you guys, somebody mentioned previously some questions about how does this work. I think some of the monies came out of core to purchase some of the vehicles. I'm not sure about it, but we're still looking into this
Yeah,
area.
that could be, but,
Yeah.
but I don't, all I know is a certain amount of money was taken from core, and it was a significant amount. It was over $200,000
Mhm.
was taken from core and given to D-Space, and which is why I was so surprised when,
Yeah, you're
The
still
numbers.
understanding, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yes, we're with you on that. So once we get all the numbers and it's all settled, we'll have to coordinate our findings so that they flow within the single document that we're all preparing. Observation 3 talks about the inconsistent financial reporting methodology. Hopefully that reads enough for everyone to kind of understand how it operated. We obviously have a finding coming up a bit, so from the observation perspective, were you guys, when you read it, did that kind of hang together for you?
Yeah.
Good, okay, good. Let's see, the financial data reporting, so there's two parts, the availability of the annual audit and the availability of D-Space actual expenditures, both a big deal as far as I'm concerned. So this kind of summarizes what was going on there. Our finding will come in a minute, our finding will come in a minute. Midpoint quality assurance, that was your title. I love that. That was basically what we're saying here. Hey, we're over halfway through. What are we learning with all these different approaches? And you'll see our actual recommendations next. So recommendations. So what we're saying is, okay, we've got, everyone's done it a little differently. Should we all keep doing it differently in our three groups, our two, alliances in our one city? Or are there learnings from this that says, this group has had more success, so maybe we should shift everybody in that direction? I don't have a view as to whether all three being differentiated is the best result, or whether there's a learning that says, well, we should all do it like Nevada, or we should all do it by DSA, or whatever. Our only suggestion here in terms of finding is study it and report it to the board, right? It's a board decision. It's not our decision. We don't make decisions like that. But we would like to suggest halfway through, it's time to look, because we have different approaches. So that's our first recommendation. Maybe we should just say, is there any disagreement with that, or you guys got a feel like it's in the ballpark with what you would recommend?
Wasn't that a topic of minor, small discussion at either the board meeting or it's ringing a big fat bell to me that I've heard this discussion at the board level of D-Space. And I thought back here somewhere, it might even be that they've already formed a subcommittee to discuss.
Well, I've been talking to Mark about it, and I think he may have formed a subcommittee. He knew this was going to come as a comment. So, because it's taken us forever to get this stupid report out, he may have been actually taking some action on it, knowing that it's coming.
That could be right.
Right.
And it's not ringing a bell for anybody else?
It is ringing a bell for me as well, Rebecca, but not just in the context of D-Space. I thought, like in their strategic planning, I thought they were going to more broadly consider what they're doing differently in all sorts of different areas, and trying to
that might
see
well
if there's
be
best practices.
Yeah, like they were talking about the strategic planning thing and what things might come up. Well, here's an idea or an example. That might well be it, and it might have been Mark who brought it up because you guys had already talked. So anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Good discussion wherever it happens.
And associated with that, okay. Where am I? Okay, so now we're going through various recommendations. So the first recommendation is that, yeah, that's the one where different approaches. So is there a better result? So that's that. The second recommendation is, okay, each individual city, like way it works by city now is that each city's revenue is a function of the square foot of the homes within the city, right?
Right.
Okay. And the inspection is done on a capitated basis. So it's like a giant home and a small home gets the same cost associated with that, which, there's some logic to that. Whether you walk around a big house or a little house, you're still walking around the house because it's still going to take an hour. So at this halfway point, we have rollovers for all of our cities. Most of our cities have rollovers, and also built into this is the whole thing about why the heck we're using core money within here. So that's kind of all tied into this. We can't give you a precise finding or recommendation until we get the numbers right, because we don't know the numbers yet. Okay, but our thought is that each city should, not by DSA, but by each city, should project out, if we're halfway there and our goal is to inspect every house every 3 years, how much more money are we going to spend? And if there's extra money here or we're short here, then we should react to that now instead of going to the end and going, oh, look at that. We're at the end and we're in trouble, right? And the language of the measure with regards to DSpace has flexibility within it. So there could be other useful things to do if, in fact, we now know it costs so many dollars to do an inspection. We're happy doing this many inspections over time. That 20% was allocated before any of this was started. That's why the language got some flexibility in it. And if you're going to, have 3 years or 2 years worth of expenditures extra at the end of the period, start planning for it now and do other local DSpace things with it. So that's what our second suggestion is, and we'll tighten that up a little bit once we get real numbers, right? Third one is the vehicle thing. We may not have a finding on vehicles. We don't know much about the vehicle things yet, so once we find out about it, we may or may not have a recommendation, really. Okay, the fourth recommendation is enough with this non-fiscal year stuff. I mean, everyone has to close their books at June 30 anyway. All the numbers are there. The payroll. You have to close your book. So what are we doing? Why are we doing this extra complicated thing here? Let's get it back and make it simpler and remove this delay, which is a 6-month delay or a 9-month delay. Well, 6 to 9 months, no matter what. So let me pause for a second. So are there any concerns about any of these observations thus far? Recommendations thus far? Knowing that you'll get another shot at them when we're done. Right. But
John, did you say we do know why they do this delay thing, or we don't know why?
they've decided to do it. That's how they're doing it. And they say, well, it's a campaign. So, we're just ramping up in April, and it was logical to them to take the whole through December amount and then take half of it and put it into each fiscal year. To me, that makes zero sense. So that was a decision that was made early on. I don't know whether we had sufficient sunshine around that to realize that's what was going on. We've always been told we have a delay in getting our data because it's taking too long. We never had a full drawn out explanation of exactly how things work, so we would understand why. And this is, it's literally, I always thought it was just because somebody was being lazy and not getting the stuff in time. But the way this is done, it's actually impossible to do the work, to close the books until you get to December and you do your half a year calculation, right? So
I still don't understand what you're saying. I don't understand so even though we're working on a fiscal year of that starts in
July 1.
We're explain to me what we're doing.
So I would like you to reread what we wrote, and honestly, because we tried to write that down in a way so people would understand it. I'll tell it to you verbally again now.
Okay,
But if what we wrote was not clear enough, then we should work on making it clear so it's
Okay.
really clear to understand. But let's pretend, let's see, how do I want to explain this? Let's go into, let's just say we didn't do anything in year one, which is probably right. We were still getting rolled up,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So let's go into year two. Okay. So in year two, we start hiring up our people in April. Okay. And then we go all summer and we're done in December. Okay. So what they did in year two, instead of closing their books in June and saying, okay, you know, this is how much we've spent because it's payroll through June. What they did instead was they said, okay, let's go all the way to December. Let's determine half of what that cost is for year two. And then for year one, since there was nothing, you'd have zero. So in year two, your expenditures would be equal to half of what we spent through December. And you don't know what you spent until December's elapsed. Then in year three, they do the same thing. And in year three, we would have had half of the second half of calendar year two, which, and then the first half of calendar year three.
so let's just say that by December, you spent 5. So you say, okay, we're gonna spend 10 for the year?
No, so if in December we spend, you know, whiteboard. If by December, let's make it 10, because it's easier math.
Okay,
If by December, we started in April of year two, and by December of year two, we spent 10. Okay, so what we do is we say, well, if we spent 10, let's allocate 5 to year two and 5 to year three.
Mhm.
And we don't know the 5, we can't close the books for year two until we get to December, because we don't know we spent 10 until we're at December, and then we say, okay, we spent 10, so we're gonna put 5 into year two. When in fact, if we geared up in April, we probably only spent 2 in year two, and we probably spent 8 in year three, right? They just had they had a methodology of cutoff that wasn't consistent with the fiscal year. They made their methodology of cutoff equal to the calendar year divided by 2, and then put 2 half years in each fiscal year.
And are we saying that this is because of how D-space evaluations are scheduled, are calendared? Because they all seem to come in, not seem to, they are all scheduled to come in whenever it is, the fall. And then they don't happen again after December until the next fall? Is that the problem about how this is?
So they chose to do it this way, and I'm not sure whether we ever understood this. We were always told that there was a delay. We didn't get all the
Yeah.
numbers because there was a delay.
Yes.
We never had a full explanation for why this delay occurred. It delayed because of this calendar year campaign, half a campaign approach. I don't think anybody, I wasn't certainly, none of us were aware of that, and Larry wouldn't have been aware of it. He would have said, no, this doesn't make any sense. So this is a choice. There's no reason why they can't do a clean cutoff. They have to close the books for the CAFR, you know, the report to the state. So this is just a complexity which was decided for what the reason it's quoted. They gave us their explanation, but it's unpersuasive.
The reason,
go ahead.
the reason that they gave us, Rebecca, is they said, well, if we do it this way, from calendar year, January to December, one fire season is in that period. But if we do the fiscal year like everybody else, it's going to split the fire season up, like 80-20, like John says.
Or 50-50, depending on the season
Yeah,
of
who
the year.
knows?
But
Okay.
it's something that should have never happened.
I totally agree. It should never have happened. Had they run it by the COC, I know at least a couple of people who would have said, BS. So I think we deserve a better lighting of this. Put a bigger flashlight on it.
Well, that's why we have the finding. Yeah, that's why they have, yeah, right.
Exactly. So I'm like Pat, I don't get it. And I don't want to have to be the, the girl on COC that doesn't understand finance, but because I think I do understand finance, but I truly don't get this and truly don't want to have to put up with it every single year. I agree with you.
Yeah, we're suggesting don't ever do this again and
Kidding.
get things sorted.
And especially if this is the reason that our reports, both theirs and ours, are late every year.
It's one of the reasons. We'll get into the other in a minute.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm
Right.
with you.
So this is something which may have made sense for year one, maybe year two, but now enough's enough?
It never made sense. You have a fiscal year end, you close your books at the end of your fiscal year end. That's it.
It's just,
And I got to check
It's as simple as that.
the
'Cause all it does
explanation.
is, go ahead, Rebecca.
I was just
All
going
it
to say
does
the
is just give
explanation.
you the amount of roll forward you've got, right? Right, if you close it, if year one at the end of the fiscal year, you'd have all of it in roll forward because you haven't done anything yet. And then in year two, because you only got ramped up probably a couple of months before June, right? Because if they hire in April, they've only got a couple of months in that year, then you would all go into the roll forward. So this methodology makes your roll forward inaccurate. The whole thing is it's just plain wrong. At the end of the 10 years, if this thing is not renewed, which is something you always have to consider,
Yeah.
what happens? Well, you're going to have this roll forward number, which is not real, So it's not based on the actual expenditures through a date, right? Because
if close it, it'll take 2 years to close the books or something.
yeah, exactly. So hence and we didn't understand this until our last meeting, and it was just like, what? Same thing with the audit being late was something I was astounded by, but okay. So that's that one. So we all agree we're gonna have a finding on it. We can work on the words later, and if we think it, and if we think it should be in all caps, Rebecca, we can do that. Yeah.
I want the emoji. I want to put this anyway.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Okay, yeah, so we tried to kind of put most of the deep information in this always resume, that's the finding parts, right? We had a hint of it in the overview, and then we put most of it into the findings, and then our recommendation is at the end there, so. Okay, so the next recommendation, yeah, so we said back in our observation section that we've only received, despite all these inquiries, Novato, right? That's the only one we got at this point. I believe that's right. So what this observation says is, look, for DSpace, consider imposing a deadline for Novato and the two alliances to provide the year-end actual expenditures report to the executive officer within 60 days of the end of the fiscal year. Maybe it's 90, whatever. They can come back to us and say that's too fast. As noted above, actual results for fiscal 25 have not been reported yet. Fiscal 25. The executive officer must monitor actual number of expenditures compliance with Measure C. This task cannot be accomplished in a timely manner with delays in reporting. This delay brings into question the level of importance that NWPA considers regarding its responsibilities in closing and timely monitoring of how members' actual expenditures comply with the restricted uses described in the measure. Okay, it's strong, and I meant it to be strong. In addition, the COC cannot accomplish its charge in a timely manner with these delays. So what's our solution, right? Because again, we're not setting policy. So our suggestion is executive officers should report the status of member timeliness to the board each meeting after year end until such time as all the darn findings are in, right? So you got all the electives there, right? And they're going to say, oh, okay, Novato's not in yet. Why not? Right? DSA is not in yet, which is comprised of like 8 or 9 groups. Why not? What's going on? So that's our suggestion there as for a more better resolution of this. Right? So.
And what does FYE,
Fiscal year end?
fiscal year end, I kept looking, thinking fiscal year, what?
We need to define that.
Yeah, if it's not, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll define that. It's like if you got a blood pressure number, and I had never known what blood pressure numbers mean. To me, it's like, oh, FYE, it's fiscal year end.
Right.
So we'll take that as a good recommendation. Okay, next one. Timely audits by CPA are a critical element of the control environment in any entity. Although caused by personnel turnover beyond the control of Marin Wildfire, I wanted to make that clear, the person left, right? The length of delay and the lack of any scheduled reporting to the board or COC to date regarding this long delay is very troubling. Now we have to update that because I checked that and I looked, that's why I knew that the agenda didn't have this on there, right? Now, and Mark knows that I've been like freaked out about this topic. So I'm glad that there has been some conversation. I'm very curious as to what was the board reaction. Was it like, holy moly, or was it blunt? Like we are, how many months later? What is it? June, so we're a year, which is 12, and now we're 9 months in. So we're 19 months after year end, right? Is that right?
Yes.
I mean, that's, to me, just astounding. Look at let me say one thing, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Look at the papers lately in Marin, right? I mean, I don't want to name names, but there's been a lot of agita in the paper about financial matters in the recent past. And to me, this, and the good news is I haven't found anything that really makes me, holy moly, this is really a problem here. But from the governance perspective, not having detailed, direct, strong conversations for months and months and months and months due to a delay, which to me is extraordinary. And if I'm the CPA, I'm talking to the chairman of the board, like long time before this date, right? There's an obligation there. I mean, that's, so I'm not crazy about the CPA either. I mean, when I last talked to Mark after our last meeting, I said, well, where's our financial stuff? And, oh, by the way, we should get the CPA report so we can tie it to the prior year report that we did. And he goes, oh, the report's not out yet. And I almost fell over. I was so surprised by it, right? So hence this comment. This delay is very troubling. I mean, we're going to have to change these wording a little bit. I think we'll have to discuss how we want to put this. I'm not sure. Again, in this other document, which we didn't get into in a lot of detail, I was very purposeful in making some of those statements, like we don't set policy. And I think it's here where we say it. Let's see. We suggest that the Board of Executive Committee should immediately undertake an investigation into the lack of timely transparency regarding this serious development and what lessons can be learned should not happen again. As with recommendation 5, this issue brings into question the level of importance an MWPA considers regarding its responsibility to closely and timely monitor how members' actual expenditures comply with the restricted uses described in the measure. And then back in that other document, I made a comment that control is not created by our inquiries, right? So our inquiries don't force Mark and staff to look at expenditures. Either he does or he doesn't, right? Whether we existed or didn't exist, we're not part of the control environment. We're extra, we're separate. So, this recent discussion, I'm gonna go back and look at the board report and see how strong I think it was, but this should have been an alarm bell, irrespective of the fact that my jaw dropped when he mentioned it to me that it hasn't been reported as of the last meeting. I mean, that should have been, I would, board's got a lot on their plate, so I'm not expecting the board to go, where's that audit report? But, certainly this condition to me is very significant and brings to question how serious the oversight is of expenditures to ensure that nothing untoward happens, right? I mean, we haven't found anything. There's 17 agencies, right? 17 different agencies get money, right? Now, I know from my corporate world how CFOs are always trying to find places to support stuff, right? I know from my government experience that there's always more to do than there's money, right? So the idea that there would be leakage out of the MWPA funds is not a small risk, and absent diligent review, it's a problem. Now, I would say that we have not found any problems anywhere, which is great. So I'm not saying this should be in the front page of the IJ like, holy moly, the money is going all willy wonky ways. That's not what's happening. But the possibility of that occurring without a very serious look at actuals, right? You don't just cut a check when you have a contractor and they're on a time and materials contract, and you pay them the money, which is the equivalent of our 20% that we give to them. You're also looking to make sure that there's flooring going down and there's plumbing occurring or whatever. So that's the diligence that is the responsibility of management. So
I'd just like to emphasize something. I think this might be the most important point of the whole report, not just DSpace, but the whole thing.
Right.
Because, and I don't think the board understood what was being reported to them. And I don't think I don't think the financial folks were actually trying to address what we're talking about. Because they kind of said, oh, this month's financial report is delayed because, well, the county Marin weren't ready yet. So it'll be ready next month. So I think the board is thinking, okay, it's delayed a month. Okay, big deal. But to put it into perspective, that the audits are 19 months behind. Okay, that makes it very difficult for the COC to do our job. I mean, we follow the money. That's the only way. That's the only tool we have to know what to address our charge, right? I don't think the board cares too much about the COC, but what they do care about is that Mark has the data to make decisions and do oversight. And if we don't have the data, he doesn't have the data. And I think that's very important. So I just wanted to emphasize that.
Yeah, when I first wrote this, you said, whoa, that's pretty strong. And that was my intention. So if it's not strong enough, we can take another bite of the apple on this topic. But to me, it's a big deal,
Or when we do our report, we could read the summary out loud in the board meeting and have somebody planted in the audience who will then take it to the IJ.
Ooh.
Well, again, well, I'm not scared of being on the front page of the IJ. That's happened a lot. You're in the paper all the time. In my past, I was. The good news is we've not found anything. Right, that's the good news. We haven't found anything, and I've actually been impressed in my early time here how quickly they set up a $20 million organization. Right. I mean, and I've always thought that the accounting, which is a bunch of Excel spreadsheets, at some point, I think a recommendation would be if you are lucky enough to pass this for a second go around, right? Then it would be time to upgrade your financial data. I wouldn't update the financial data because it is working. They are producing data. It's there. It's a little bit like an old jalopy. You know what I mean? But if you had another 10 years on it, you'd know that okay, now let's now that this is the methodologies are there, just like we have our methodology now. Although we're going to keep talking about it. That's a tease. It would be time to invest some money in getting something better. Or, I mean, right now this is, and I also agreed with having another organization to do the bookkeeping. You wouldn't want a full-time bookkeeper. So, I was on the sewer board of Marin, very Southern Marin, very special task. And Mill Valley supported all that, which made sense. You didn't want to have a full-time person, you know. So I agree with the concept, but I think the financial records could be the books could be better, right? So
Yeah.
As a topic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Last recommendation.
Last recommendation, yeah, because I'm going on here. That's just the whole thing about grants. We talked about this before. Like everyone's got. The good news is that the grants are, and I have to go back to. I'm not sure. Did we make this comment before? We might. I just haven't a chance. Anyway, the point is, we're just like you've got core money being spent on DSpace, which kind of makes me go. We also have expenditures coming from DSpace, local, and core for grant making. And the good news is that the grants are all in one database, so there's no, you don't get 3, you only get 1. But they have different approaches, and I think because you don't see the total grant dollars, because they're spread in 3 different groups, no one's added them all up to say, hey, by the way, grant making is 60% of your total $20 million, or maybe it's only 6% of your total $20 million, so maybe that's fine. But I think a conversation at the board level that has all this data would be relevant. Okay. Then we also had the other one, which is the abatement stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Questions, comments on DSpace?
I found, and this is not at all a criticism, but I just found some inconsistencies in capitalization
So we'll do that later.
and we
Right.
will take care of that
Right.
at a later time.
Right.
Who actually wrote this?
I wrote most of them.
Okay.
So I didn't.
Yeah.
What was that thing with commas, whatever then?
Well, yeah, there's some style things that we have written that take care of some of that stuff, but not to worry about it. It will
Oh,
get
wow,
taken care
deja
of.
vu.
All right, let's move on to local, and there's 2 attachments here. Local report and then an addendum.
The local report is essentially what you've seen before. We changed findings to, I'm not even sure we had findings before, but it's now observations. And we don't have any recommendations. So, and I didn't think that we needed to see any additional financial information. John, correct me if that's not right. What we reported out was that they were all within their budget. They all spent about what they said they were going to spend on about what they said they were going to spend it on. So we didn't have any comments about money. So
yeah, so there's the revenue, which is the 20%, and that's simple. That's just math, right? And then there's the how they actually spent it and what their rollover is. So they have provided all that information.
they have.
Good, that's good.
Okay.
Everyone's in. That's good.
Okay. Yeah.
And then you pick 5 of them and you looked at their actual expenditures.
That's right.
And not their budgeted expenditures, but their actual expenditures.
Their actuals. That's right.
Okay,
Well, we
that's
looked at the budgets the first time around when we got the numbers. And then at the end of it, we looked at the actuals. And
exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
okay.
And
So-
and the only reason you spend any time on budget, just to make this help with that other theory document, is that if you do some of the budget work early, that speeds things up. So you can do some of that work before even end of FYE, fiscal year end. Right? So you can do some of that in April, May. That's what we did last cycle. We finished the last review, and then we went right into the next year, and it was before books were closed in June. I think we started at April or something like that. And then we went on from there, especially with core, because a lot of it is, is anything jumping out at you because it's a different level of review. So
So the only numbers things, let me see if I got this right. The only numbers things that's pending for all of us is when the audits finally come, we gotta look in with the footnotes to make sure that it all is linked up. Is that correct?
No, there's several things. One is, if you will, the finance track is what we used to call it. And what that is going to say, the audited financial statements, it's been agreed, we haven't seen it yet because we haven't got the audit, but the audited financial statements were to contain literally all the stuff which is in the finance report and a footnote to the financial statements. Footnotes to financial statements have a review from the auditor that means that, the auditor is saying those are fairly presented, in accordance with, general set of accounting principles, materially correct. So, staff provides okay, this is what our revenue was. If you multiply it times 0.2, this is what was given out in checks to local. This is what was given out in checks, for DSA to the individual cities, which then the individual cities reimburse their actual costs back to their sponsoring entities, based on the capitation methodology. So all that is there. So that's all in the finance thing. The key, though, that each of our three groups has to make sure of is, for instance, ours is a good example. We only have data thus far on the inspections, right? Well, we need to say, okay, what else was spent, right? Right? Because Mark was just showing us the inspection information. Well, he needs to show us the actual expenditures within each of the cities, because each city should have their allocation of DSA based on their capitated amount, and then anything else they spend on, and those together total should result in the roll forward amount. And we need to look at that second piece, right? And the same thing with core, like you said, you guys looked at core, based on the actual expenditures, and local based on the actual expenditures. So that's all good. That's how that all should work.
Okay.
So for our primary document, which is our contribution to the three sections of the report, that first handout is it. That's what we would submit. It's done, I think, ready to go. The second thing that we put in there is, I don't want to see any eyeballs rolling. It's my contribution to having reviewed what happened with the demonstration gardens. It is a very positive piece that I do think should go into our annual report. I went on the tour that Nevada Fire District did of their demonstration garden, which is one of the ones we complained about last year.
Yeah.
Yes, if I could put my initials on it, I would. I'm not embarrassed by it. So the big thing was none of them put any signage up to say, this is what we're demonstrating, this is why we're demonstrating it, and this is what you can take away from it. This year, Novato did that on at the district headquarters. It's all really good signage, really explanatory, really tells you this is what you can take away from it and do on your own. And then they give tours, and they have people at the headquarters who are trained on how to do that, and they were there, and a couple of them spoke up, and they said, this is what and they showed all the plants and said, this is what you can do. Now, the really good news the other good news about doing tours at the headquarters at Novato is now the plants have all been there for about 18 months. So it's filled out. It looks really good. They actually bloom. It looks nice. It's not a dry desert looking thing. It's not a Marin garden of old, but I do think it could be a sample of what a Marin garden going forward could look like. And people would still be happy with whatever they can plant. So, good news.
It is correct that one of the things we have to do at the end is, we did this last in the prior year report, when I was chair, I remember it because I had presented to the board. We had each of our findings, and then from the year before, because I don't think we had any findings last year, if I remember right.
You're saying meaning recommendations.
Yeah. Whatever,
Okay.
you know what they're called. Okay, sorry, I just, anyway. And we resolved them, either we agree or further action needs to happen, right? That's what we did last cycle, right? Because some things weren't quite done yet. So we need to, when we present this year's report, we need to update that, which would be exactly what Rebecca was talking about, where, Garden, I don't remember whether we closed it or we said they haven't done it yet, but if we closed it, we can still add this year. Wow, it's great.
You have to go, Pat.
Yeah, I have to go. I would like to suggest for the agenda next time that we put all the reports first, so that we get this done, so that it gets out the door. And then we have a discussion on
Foundational documents or
or
onboarding stuff.
Yeah. And we also need to have a bylaws discussion, which we have not done today, so.
Did we just do that?
I think we formed a committee, didn't we, to talk
Well,
about
we
bylaws?
formed a committee, but the committee has some observations before we
Okay.
wish to do any writing, and want to talk to everybody about the observations. So, but I think next time we really, really need to have the report items first, after all the required by law things, call the roll.
One other thing we also have to do, by the way, is if that audit is complete, we still have to compare that to the prior year financial report in my year, right? We have to make sure that that's all done. Right?
Do we have to wait for the audit before we publish?
No. We last time we said that if the audit shows any differences, and by the way, we still don't know because we haven't got it yet, then we would go back and report to the board any differences. That's how we resolve. Because generally, you would not expect there to be any big differences.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so
That's why part of it.
So what do we need to do then next time?
So next time, one thing will happen is the audited financials for my year, which is now how many years ago, I can't remember, had the footnotes should be exactly consistent with what's in the financial section. Remember at the beginning, there's the financial section, which is written by staff. So we just have to tick, 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 all the numbers are the same. It should take like 5 minutes, but you have to do that task and then document we've done it. Or we go, hey, that's a different number. That doesn't agree. Then, oh my gosh, we got to get back to the board. So that's an effort we need to formally accomplish.
And do we have, in my mind, that's a financial committee or financial section thing. Is that true? That our financial, whoever.
If you went to the prior year report, the very first part of it, I mean, maybe Martina, you could pull it up real quick. It is right before all the tables is a narrative which runs a couple pages, 2-3 pages, I think, that has all the numbers in it. And we just have to tile those numbers out. They should be in the footnotes to the financial statement. So we said that you didn't need a committee for it because it should be quite easy to do. We just have to formally do it and say, okay, we've accomplished this and it all works. Does that make sense, Rebecca?
If we don't have a committee, then how is that getting done?
We're going to do it all collectively.
Oh.
We don't need a subcommittee because we can just literally all do it, right? Because what happens with our subcommittees is like I just presented at great length DSpace and said, you guys agree with those findings? We said, yes, we do. I mean, there could be a circumstance when a subcommittee doing one of the three tracks comes up with something and the broader organization, our broader COC doesn't like it, and we debate it and come to a conclusion there. But in this particular case, it's so easy just to put it up and just do it. It should be a routine step. Martina, have you got it?
Are you asking for the 23-24 annual report?
Is that what it is? Yeah, right.
Okay.
The last one we done, the last one we published, yeah.
Sure. Here we go.
Yeah, now just keep scrolling forward down. Oh, goats. All right. Just roll down. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Great letter from the president. Okay, keep going and stop. Okay, that section there, right? So start with metrics, all that stuff, right? So it just says, okay, you know, if you take $21 million, 841 times 19.9%, that's what was given to the members, and the 86,000 is for the abatement fund, right? So the next section, 20% was dedicated for local, 21 million times 20% is 4.3 million, et cetera, right? So we should see that number, 4301350, that number should be in the footnotes to the financial statements. So we literally just have to look at them and make sure they're all the same. If you go down a page more, the more complicated one, keep going, keep going, keep going, that one. That's the 80% thing. You know, the 80% zone
Right.
allocation. Yeah, that should be a footnote. And it should have those exact numbers. And if they don't, then we got to say, why not? And if the audited number is different than what we were given, and we spent, you and I spent a ton of time making sure all this worked, you know, because at a time there was a problem, then if they don't agree, then we're going to have a problem. So we don't, that's the audit, purpose of the audit is to say that we're not auditors, we're not closing the books, the auditors close the books because we requested it and it was appropriate that it become a footnote that elevates the CPA's look at it. And if it all agrees, it agrees, you know, and if it doesn't, then a big problem, so.
So what you're suggesting then is instead of a committee going through and writing this section, that we as a whole COC can do that because it's,
we'll just take the audited financial statements as published and look at the footnote and say, yeah, those numbers are all the same. I mean, I'll help us direct us through that, but we can literally all do it. We don't need a subcommittee to do it to report back because it's so self-apparent. It's paint by numbers, basically.
But John, the section that we're looking at is written by somebody in advance of our doing that, correct?
This was written by staff.
Oh, okay.
This is written by staff. The history is back in the very beginning, very kind Larry Chu, this very typical Larry. He made all these pivot tables and put all the stuff together. And then I came on and said, I'm not doing that. And that's part of the whole, that other document that obviously makes me a little upset. Also had statements in it that says we're oversight, we're not management. We don't do these things. That's what management does. So management creates this document and then the auditors audit the document and then we do our thing. And then we just make sure in our report, because all our stuff ties to this also, that it's all the same stuff, you know, that all ties together.
Okay.
So,
Okay. So somebody must be working on this for our report already.
yes, Mark, I thought we would have had it by now.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
That's why in the very beginning, you were with me, the adjective that surrounded getting these numbers here, because these numbers only contained the inspection cost and not the total cost. And it was like, well, wait, you know, and then you kindly put those numbers together and I was trying to make the point, well, this is there's a debate as to whether whose report is what, you know, but these are their numbers, not our numbers.
Martina, would you please roll to the top of this document? I can't remember what the title of this section is. It's called,
Financial oversight.
Financial oversight, background, keep on scrolling down a little bit. Background and metrics. Financial.
Metrics, yeah. And that just tells the whole story of, it's written so a member of the public can clearly understand what's going on. We collected 20 million bucks.
Right.
20% of 20 million is 4 million, and 4 million went out to local, and 4 million went out to DSpace, and the other whatever it is, 16 was available for core, and we have this 80% test, and this is where we are in the 80% test at this particular moment, because we'd never hit the 80% cumulative numbers until I think it's this year is the first time.
Year 5.
Yeah, we've caught up, because appropriately in the very first year, we didn't do the usual government thing and spend all the money as quick as we can. We said, let's wait until we're ready, which is great. And then that's why if you go up to my report, go to the audit, the chair letter, go up. There, stop there. Yeah, go down there. Yeah, so this is what the chair letter is telling us. We had cumulative unspent funds of 16 million, almost $17 million, and Pat had some adjective about that. And I said, well, look, you got to understand what year they came from.
Right.
Only 25,000 for the current year. We kind of caught up, at least as far as the current year spending is concerned. We're looking for this number to go negative, right? To bring this down. We got 16 million bucks there, and if you go down to the next paragraph, some of it is reserved for certain things, and some of it is like totally like money we could spend tomorrow, and we're expecting that money to be spent. Like we should see in this year's report, we don't have the report yet, we should see a reduction. That 16 million should go down to a smaller number as they spend more, right? Yeah.
Can we go on to committee members' request regarding future agenda items, because we are already doing that? You can unshare, Martina.
Before we leave the reports of the report, where maybe that's what's going to come in the next thing. Never mind. Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, I would have expected it like 2 back. I kept saying, where is it? That financial metrics, we should have had that quite a while ago, but we don't have it yet.
Well, what I'm thinking is, where are we with our annual report? What I heard is core is ready, local is ready, DSpace, yours is.
We're close. We need a little more work. Now we've
Okay,
got,
so a
yeah.
little bit. So next time, then we still need to have this item on the agenda, just enough so that DSpace can say, yeah, we're done and here's what we did. And then we still need somebody to put the intro and the wrap up and say, here it is ready.
Right, yeah. The Jenny would have to write her letter, which, she could do soon, right?
Yeah.
And then you're gonna get a letter from the president, and then the rest of it's all, the financial report goes into all of our stuff, and then that's it. Then there's a question of which is not a small task, is the actual production
Yes.
of it. And several of you worked hard on trying to give us a template so it wasn't completely different. At least we're all using the same software and the same typeset and all that kind of stuff. So there will probably need some additional cleanup, because at least one of us doesn't write perfectly, to get it like totally clean and then ready to go. Then it would be usually the next meeting would be a consent item, essentially, right?
So selfishly, what I'm getting at is, when do Larry and I get to cut the cord?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Right.
So, well, I'll just keep plugging along with what's on our plate, but I think local is done, except for the part of going back in and seeing what recommendations were made last year that we need to follow up on, besides the demonstration gardens.
Yeah, there's the one on the Rangers, obviously, that was not. I guess that's still not resolved, if I understand things. I'm not quite sure where that one's, but yeah, there's a few things.
So we don't have anybody who's doing that. Is that true? Do we each need to be? Do you guys need to look at DSpace and Jenny and I at local and?
Yes, we should. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I've been keeping notes on what's been suggested for the agenda, and it's a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Number one, Pat suggested we do reports first. So that'll be number one, Martina. And I'm going to put in parentheses, including follow-up from 23-24. Okay, so everybody will try and add that to their report. Number 2, we're going to revisit the COC review procedures document that John put together. Also the timeline and whatever onboarding stuff. So we can kind of consolidate all that stuff for new members, because I personally found out very helpful, all of that stuff. But it'd be nice to consolidate it. Number 3, bylaws. The bylaws committee is going to do a report. And I guess they have some questions for us. Number 4, a report on the status of the financial oversight section, the narrative, that is the overview and the metrics section. I don't know if Mark's working on that. He might have it done, but just if he could address where we are in that process, because that's going to be crucial for our getting the report out. And then number 5, the audit comparison that John's going to lead us through, assuming that the audit will be ready for us by next month. And if it's not, we'll just bump it to the following meeting, whatever. Did I miss anything?
You've done well. I don't think you missed a thing.
Okay. Does that sound okay, Martina?
Certainly. And then when I am doing the minutes for the meeting, I'll just review and check to see if there was anything else discussed.
Yeah.
And then if I come up with anything, I'll run it by you.
Good. Thank you. I believe that takes us to number 11, which is adjournment.
My favorite.
Do I need to entertain a motion to adjourn?
Before we do we have a date for the next meeting?
We do. I believe it is at the bottom of the notes that Vice Chair Wagner is reading. I believe the next meeting is May, I think, 27. I'm just double checking my
May
calendar
27th
here.
at 3 o'clock. Yes, that's correct. Thanks, Martina.
27th?
May
Thank you.
27th.
Great,
Unless
thanks.
otherwise posted. I mean, the committee can always convene and just, discuss convening in a different day or time if
Same
necessary.
bat time, I assume 3 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
And Martina knows that I rushed to get here, forgetting that it was 3 o'clock, and I got here at 2:05.
Oh no.
And I hate being late for anything. So the good news is I was 55 minutes early.
Rebecca, it looks like you and I are going to stay on this committee forever. We're never going to get the report done at this rate.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time and energy.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
stand adjourned.
Martina.
See you all next month.
And
Bye.
thanks to Kathleen, too.
Scott, be well.
Just a few more pushes that could interfere with the Christmas party.
No